I want to bring in MS Now senior White House reporter Vaughn Hilliard. MS Now's is then Inez de la Cuchera, live in Tel Aviv. Peter Baker is chief White House correspondent for the New York Times and an MS Now contributor. And Ali Vaez is Iran project director and senior advisor to the president at the International Crisis Group. It's good to have all of you here. Peter, Secretary Hegseth essentially dismissing questions about how long the war will go on, what it will take, even putting of potential troops on the ground. What is the administration telling the American people here? You just have to trust us?
Essentially, that's exactly right. Look, they are not outlining methods and operations, but they're also not outlining the goals. I mean, he says we're not going to tell you how we're going to get to our goals, but he hasn't really told us what the goals are. And you see a conflict there. The president over the weekend in his video that he released upon the beginning of this operation said that he was for regime change. And then you hear Pete Hegseth, his defense secretary, say, no, we're not for regime change. So which is it? Is it that there was an imminent threat, or is it there was a chance to take out the leadership? They're all over the map on this, and has not been a clear, consistent message from this administration. They haven't even seemed to be trying to. The president of the United States has still not given a speech to the American public about this war. The event he just had, he kind of slipped in a few minutes about the ongoing war into an event that wasn't about the ongoing war. And it's a very odd and very unusual way to try to communicate to the American public and explain to them why their country is at war and what they should expect.
Yeah, and didn't miss an opportunity, Vaughn, to take on the nuclear accord, which his administration got out of. But what more did you hear from the president that you think is worth noting?
I think it's the justification that the president attempted to lay out there to the American public as to why they move forward with these strikes here this weekend. This was the words of the president of the United States saying that America was, quote, very nearly under threat. I think that those are a phrase that we will be talking about for a long time to come, because the president now has willingly gone in and captured Nicolas Maduro, the head of Venezuela, and now has taken out the supreme leader and other leaders in Iran here, effectively indicating that even if the direct threat is not completely imminent, that merely the idea that Iran was beginning to build or seek to enrich uranium beyond what the U.S. in this administration was willing to let it do, that was a justification enough to move forward with these strikes. And I think that we are going to have to continue to come back to the Omani foreign minister who flew to Washington, D.C. this last Friday. He sat down and talked even with our colleague David Rode and was suggesting that the Iranians were putting forward a nuclear deal proposal that was better than the JCPOA agreement struck by the Obama administration, and suggested that Trump administration officials, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, were flexible in terms of negotiations about the nuclear capacities to which Iran would be able to enrich. And so you fast forward here through the weekend, and what you just heard from the president of the United States was the direct words that, quote, we can't deal with these people. Essentially here in the second Trump administration, there is just a lack of willingness to move forward diplomatically. And I think that there is a serious question of the cloud that will loom over Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff in any further negotiations over the next 3 years, whether it be related to Middle East negotiations or Russian-Ukrainian ones, the extent to which their words are spoken in good faith, or whether the president of the United States will undercut any sort of those diplomatic negotiations that they are out doing on his behalf.
So let's go to the region. Ines, you're in Israel. What's the latest on military operations and the threat posed to the U.S. and its allies?
Yeah, Chris, the threat very much still ongoing. Iran has been responding exactly as it said it would. Iran fighting for its survival and targeting U.S. bases, U.S. interests in the region. So we've seen throughout the day drone and missile attacks on places like Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, all places that have a U.S. military presence. Today, Qatar saying it shot down 2 Iranian fighter jets, waiting to hear more on that. But we also know that 3 American fighter jets were shot down in Kuwait. That was a case of friendly fire. Kuwaiti air defenses accidentally shooting down those 2 planes, and there were no injuries there. But we do know that at least 4 U.S. service members have now been killed. 4 remain in critical condition, and the president saying there could be more American casualties to come. Meanwhile, today we also saw the Iranians targeting energy facilities. So in Qatar, they've shut down their liquefied natural gas production because of drone attacks on some of those facilities. In Saudi Arabia, Aramco shut down its largest oil refinery because of attacks on those facilities as well. So that is causing concern for the economy, for what that could mean for oil prices, which could have a real impact on the American economy, of course, for Americans back home. We also know the Omanis said that an oil tanker had been targeted by a ship filled with explosives. And I will say we are starting to hear that gas prices are soaring in Europe, gas prices soaring by about 45%, Chris.
Thank you for that. So, Ali, I want to play a little bit more of what Secretary Hegseth had to say about the Iranian regime.
This is not a so-called regime change war, but the regime sure did change, and the world is better off for it.
Is it clear that this was regime change, and is the world better off?
It's very hard to understand what the secretary means by regime change. Of course, the supreme leader has been eliminated, but the regime is still there. This was never a one-man show. This is a system. It has already filled the vacuum at the top with a council comprised of the president, the head of the judiciary, and a member of the Guardian Council. And the president is still there. The rest of the structure is still there. It has its repressive capacity in place. It is punching back against the region, against the U.S., against Israel. So I don't fully understand what the secretary means by regime change has already happened. Yes, you can say there's a degree of transformation because Ayatollah Khamenei is not there anymore, but this is far short of regime change.
Well, Hegseth also made a case for why the attack was launched now by saying Iran was in the midst of building what he called a, quote, conventional shield for its nuclear blackmail ambitions. Is that what you saw happen?
So let's take a step back. The president said last year after the 12-day war, the Operation Midnight Hammer, that the nuclear program was obliterated. And we know based on UN inspectors that there's not been any evidence that Iran has resumed its enrichment program. So it was not spinning a single centrifuge, was not enriching a single gram of uranium. And we know that Iran's ballistic missile program has been limited to a 2,000-kilometer range, which covers, of course, Israel and all the U.S. bases in the region, but was never going towards the intercontinental ballistic missile capability. Iran has a space launch program which has some overlap with intercontinental ballistic missile technology, but the two are not necessarily the same. When you send a satellite into space, it doesn't need to come back down. But when you have a ballistic missile, it has to come back and get through the atmosphere and not explode and hit the ground. So these are two different technologies, even though there is some overlap. And again, Defense Intelligence Agency says that Iran would not be able to be in a position to have ICBMs until at least 3 to 4 years from now.
So there's the complexity there. But I just want to talk about a little bit of the politics of this, Peter, and start by playing some of what the president has said in the past.
Our current strategy of nation building and regime change is a proven absolute failure. We have created the vacuums that allow terrorism to grow and thrive. These globalists want to squander all of America's strength, blood, and treasure, chasing monsters and phantoms overseas while keeping us distracted from the havoc they're creating right here at home.
What do we know, Peter, about how this is landing with his base? And we should say many of whom will be going to vote in primaries coming up in just 24 hours or in the next couple of weeks or months.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing a difference between candidate Trump and Trump 1.0 and what we're now seeing in Trump 2.0, right? I mean, as recently as 2024, he was saying it was Biden and Kamala Harris with the warmongers. They're going to take you to World War III. I'm the guy who will have no new wars. And that regime change, as you showed him saying, was a failure. And now here we are, barely a year into a second term, and he's now on the 9th military operation of this second term. He's had more military strikes against more countries than any president in the modern era, more in 1 year than Biden had in 4. And it's such a contrast, right? Now, a lot of liberals are going to complain about that, but what's really fascinating is to see what happens with the MAGA base, because you hear from the people like Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene, obviously on the outs with the president, saying this isn't what we voted for. We voted for a guy who was going to get us out of Middle East wars, not going to sit there and use American treasure and lives to influence other places when there's not an obvious imminent threat. And there doesn't seem to be an obvious imminent threat here, given the administration's own conclusions. So it's a pretty big change for a guy who basically came to office saying he was the president of peace.